بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Towards the beginning, while we were listening to Surah Al-Anbiya, we heard the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, as a young man, was living amongst people, including members of his family, who worshipped idols, didn't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Perhaps from amongst them was either his father or his uncle. And Ibrahim alayhi salam would give them da'wah, would call them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and would try and make them understand the how illogical it was to worship idols that could not help you. And he would try and reason with them, and they would not listen. So eventually Ibrahim alayhi salam decided what may be a way to get them to think, right? To get them to reason and realize that these idols can't help us, is he waited once for the temple within which they would worship these idols to be empty. Everyone was out, the temple was empty. Ibrahim alayhi salam comes in, and one by one he goes to each of the small idols and shatters them. One by one he breaks all of them. After he's done breaking all of them, he leaves the big one, right? Doesn't touch the big one. And the Mufassirun mentioned that the tool or the axe that he used to shatter them, he actually hung it off of the big one. And then he left. The people come back into the temple eventually, and when they come back in and they see the scene, the idols that they worshipped are all shattered, except for the big one. They're horrified, right? Who could have committed such a crime? So they start thinking of suspects. Who could be a suspect? Some of them say, سَمِعْنَا قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا فَتًى يَذْكُرُهُمْ يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيم. Some of them remember and they say, there's a young man. A fata means a young man. We've heard him talk about them. We've heard him say bad things about our gods. يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيم. His name is Ibrahim. So if you're looking for a suspect, he has a motive. He doesn't like our gods. And it also shows us that while Ibrahim alayhi salam is going through this process of giving them da'wah, he's a young man. Because whenever society shifts off course, right, and society is no longer functioning or running the way it's supposed to be running, when there's a change that needs to be brought, it's always the youth who bring it in. And this is Ibrahim alayhi salam as a young man trying to bring that change within his community. سَمِعْنَا فَتًى. We've heard of a young man talking about our gods. يُقَالُ لَهُ إِبْرَاهِيم. His name is Ibrahim. They say, summon him, bring him. Let's ask him. أَأَنْتَ فَعَلْتَ هَذَا بِآلِهَتِنَا يَا إِبْرَاهِيم. They bring Ibrahim alayhi salam in front of them, and they ask him, Ya Ibrahim, were you the one who did this to our gods? Ibrahim alayhi salam, in order to make them think, says, بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ. It seems as if it's this big one who did it. Right? You think I'm the one who did it? He's the one with the axe. Right? Seems like he's the one who did it. Why don't you ask them? Maybe they'll tell you. Trying to make them think, right? If these gods could not protect themselves, they couldn't help themselves. And if they can't even tell you who was the one who broke us or who destroyed us, how are they going to help you? Why are you worshiping them? So eventually the people decide, they say, or they respond to them, they say, you know that our gods don't talk. They don't talk. There's no point in asking them. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he sees that they just aren't getting it, eventually he says, أُفِّل لَكُمْ وَلِمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Uff to you and what you're worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his people, what they resort to do, what do they do? Because there's no way you can actually give a reasonable response to what he's saying, right? Rationality is out the window. And when you can't respond with reason, what do you resort to? You resort to violence. If you can't respond to that voice, you have to shut it down. قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ. Burn him alive. That's the only way you can give success to your gods, is if you burn him alive. The point here, my dear brothers and sisters, is, like we said, if change needs to be brought, it always comes from the youth. But it's not just any youth. Youth who have iman, who have taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Youth who are competent, qualified, courageous. Because standing up to society when everyone else is saying one thing and whatever everyone else is saying is wrong, going against the grain is not easy. It requires a lot of courage. And to stand on principles like Ibrahim alayhi salam. He knew what the risk was. When he stood up to them and he said, "Uffil lakum wa lima ta'buduna min dunillah," he knew what they would resort to. But why didn't he at that moment stutter, falter, his footsteps faltered? Why didn't that happen? Because of principle. His iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in order for change to come, and that's what we're lacking nowadays, and it's a responsibility of the community as a whole to bring up a youth that are principled, courageous, and stand up for that which is right, regardless of what the cost is. Another lesson that we can take from among the stories that we were listening to is the story of Ayyub alayhi salam. A lesson in sabr, in patience. Ayyub alayhi salam, the Mufassirun say, was a man that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given, a prophet, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given a lot of wealth. Wealth, family, health, he had everything. And slowly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took all of that away. He lost his wealth, he lost his possessions, he lost his family, and eventually he lost his health as well. Became paralyzed, bedbound. And the Mufassirun mentioned that he was bedbound for decades. Decades, bedbound, paralyzed, can't do anything, lost everything that he owned. But not once did he complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not once did he complain. And when he finally asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for relief, what does he say? وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرُّ. Oh my Lord, I have been touched by harm. I've just been touched by harm. He didn't say, Ya Allah, I lost all my wealth, I lost my family, I've been bedbound for decades. No, I have been touched by harm. Harm has just touched me. وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. And you are the most merciful. Right, that's the sabr of the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. And it's that sabr, one of the objectives of this fast, of the month of Ramadan, is that we try and cultivate that quality of sabr. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam said, "As-sawmu nisfu as-sabr." Half of the quality of patience is developed through this exercise of fasting. That's one of the objectives of the month of Ramadan. So it's important while we're doing the ibadah and fasting during the day that we keep the objectives in mind. Are we getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are we increasing in these qualities, the qualities of the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam? Because tests come in life, right? Tests come in life. That's what life is. Life is a test. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. We will test you, we'll send all sorts of tests your way, you will lose wealth, you will lose people that you love, but give glad tidings to those who go through those tests with sabr. Give glad tidings to the people of sabr. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from amongst the people of sabr. And may He grant this ummah a youth that is courageous and is firm in iman and taqwa and stands on principle. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khayri khalqihi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.